Hello, everybody. Here is the lecture slash presentation for week 10 of Advanced Practice 2. We are going to begin today talking about couples therapy. Thank you all for your flexibility given the vacation schedule that I had for my kids' spring break. So I appreciate you putting up with listening to a recorded lecture. So throughout this presentation, first we are going to talk about kind of the basics, the research, a little bit of the research anyways, leading up to couples therapy. We're going to talk about some ideas and suggestions for assessing couples. And then we'll talk about some theoretical approaches to how to provide couples therapy. And then we'll wrap up and I'll give you the tidbits that you need to know for our next class period. So to begin with, let's talk about marriage. Marriage is hard. There's so many things that play into struggles that come about in marriages. We all know there's high rates of divorce in our country and all over the world. There's a lot of stressors that are put on spousal relationships. It could be financial, it could be related to children, it could be related to a family illness, family emergency, different communication styles, different upbringings, trauma. Lots of things can play in and bring stress into a relationship. As I mentioned, one being spouses or an extended family member or even a child living with an illness. All of these things and many more can provide an added level of strain on what is already a challenge. Um, Being connected with another individual for many, many years is hard. So, thankfully, there's been a lot of research done and some different ways to help out and help couples deal with that stress and maintain healthy and happy relationships. So, we will get started talking about therapy, couples therapy. As I mentioned on the previous slide, there is research done to show that counseling can help. So, if any of you are interested in working with couples, pay attention. Anybody that isn't interested in working with couples, pay attention because even though you may not have a goal of providing couples therapy or marital therapy, it is very likely that at some point in time throughout your career, while you work with a client, a single client, there may be pieces that you need to tie in based on the relationships that that individual has, one of them possibly being a spousal relationship. So let's talk about research. There's been a lot of research done on spousal relationships and good and bad, and what goes into healthy relationships. The Gottmans are the most widely recognized researchers when it comes to marital relationships. They've done so many different scenarios and different studies with couples. They claim that they can tell whether or not a marriage will succeed in a very short period of time, and it's based on small bits of communication patterns that they see within a relationship. And what's important to note is that when these particular things are witnessed within a relationship, the downfalls, the difficulties can be worked through and addressed. But if they're not, they will most likely ultimately lead to either an extremely unhappy marriage or ultimately end in divorce. So one of the things that they talk about are the four horsemen of the apocalypse, is what they've affectionately called it. And this is really about four different interactional patterns in spousal relationships that can cause severe problems within that relationship. The first one being criticism. And this is when one person attacks the other person's character rather than attacking a behavior or an action that the other person has done or participated in. So it's really about kind of attacking them at their core instead of addressing an individual particular behavior or even a pattern of behaviors. So you've heard, I'm sure, a lot about using I statements to express your concerns or your feelings rather than you statements. Within this criticism realm, this is really about using the you statements. You did this wrong. You're horrible because you don't ever listen to me when I talk to you. Those you statements is really based in that criticism realm of the four horsemen. Number two is defensiveness. This is most often a reaction to criticism within the communication pattern, and it's more often than not, it's just a reflex. It's just what we do to protect ourselves in that fight or flight. When we feel attacked, we will either fight or flight. Now, flighting may look like just getting angry and upset and telling the spouse to get off my back, leave me alone, and just getting upset and almost shutting down and not participating in a healthy dialogue about whatever the presenting problem is. Another form of defensiveness is to turn the tables and turn it back onto your spouse, that really what they're upset about is really their fault because they didn't do it right, or they didn't handle it appropriately, or things like that. So again, defensiveness typically comes as a reaction to that criticism of an individual's core, where they feel that that deep sense of attack, and then their defenses go up into that fight or flight mode. Number three is contempt. Contempt is one way to look at it is when it is criticism, but along with it, there's an intent to harm. Okay, so this comes with a little bit more of intention behind it. And, criticism places blame and attacks on a person's character rather than expressing the feelings. Contempt takes that a step further, where it's meant to dig and to hurt at that other person. So oftentimes contempt will grow and develop with the higher level of criticism present in the relationship. So we never start out a relationship with the intent to hurt the other person, or dig away at their character. But over time, with unresolved criticisms, that becomes internalized, and that contempt grows. The Gottmans claim that contempt is one of the most significant predictors of divorce, that once that contempt rises and that contempt builds up over time, that is a very, very, very high predictor that couple's relationship will not stand. Fourth, they talk about stonewalling. Stonewalling is typically a response to that contempt that has built up over time. It often involves putting up a wall being between you and your partner. And we do this when we feel overwhelmed or attacked. And it really cuts off and breaks down healthy communication around problem situations. Oftentimes it's just again, it's kind of that reflex reaction as we respond to criticism or prolonged criticism, which turns into contempt. We often start by feeling defensive to those things, as we talked about a little earlier, but eventually our character, our personalities come up with something to protect ourselves, and that's where stonewalling comes in. We begin to develop an unwillingness to even acknowledge our partner's perceptions and that theirs are different than ours. We begin to see our partner as a threat to our own safety, our own emotional safety. And when we stop responding to our partner in that way, we're effectively shutting off or killing any chance of healthy communication or reconciliation after any signs of distress. When you see any 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these horsemen showing up in a relationship, you'll also see signs of having a lack of positive affect. There's an emotional distance or an estrangement between the two spouses, and just an apathy, just a general malaise towards the partner in the relationship. So what the Gottmans have done throughout their research is really look at, kind of break it down into these 4 core major issues. And then the goal being to get rid of the criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, and then build in more healthy, appropriate communication patterns between the spousal partners so that it will then lead to a healthier relationship. So we talk about the research about the bad stuff, the stuff that we don't want to see in relationships. However, when a couple comes in for therapy, you're likely to witness at least one of those 4 from that previous slide. But what they also have researched is healthy marriage predictors. What does a healthy relationship look like? Partners that are open-minded and flexible. They stand up for themselves in disagreements, but they do this without that criticism piece, without putting the other partner down. It's a partnership. They work together mutually to find mutually satisfying solutions to disagreements. No one can say that there will never be conflict or disagreement in that relationship. So, but when you have 2 partners that are willing to work together to come up with some sort of compromise, then it produces healthy communication patterns and then leads to a healthier relationship. Repairing damage. The Gottmans talk a lot about, we're humans and we're fallible. We make mistakes all the time, even in spousal relationships. And it's rare that you would ever see a relationship where criticism doesn't ever enter the arena. So they talk a lot about how to repair whatever damage has been done, either in a single large argument, on a day-to-day basis, or over time after many years where that contempt and stonewalling has been able to infiltrate that relationship. It's important, they say, to have more positive than negative interactions. I pretty sure 5-to-1 ratio. What they've found in their research is that when those negative interactions happen, you should have 5 more positive interactions to that one single negative interaction. And that helps work to repair the damage that's done. We all make mistakes, and we all say things and do things that may hurt someone that we love. But where the real work is done is in repairing that damage. You can do this by a number of different ways, even just something as simple as showing interest in what the other person is doing, noticing and acknowledging positive things, even if it's tiny, giving support, being there for your spouse when they're struggling with anything, or even just giving support when they're not struggling, but giving in an extra hand with something that you may not normally help out with. And then working together to have a shared purpose in life, whether that be raising a family, whether that be, working towards a career goal, whether that be, home ownership, or whatever that sense of purpose is in life, knowing that while you each may have your own individual pieces and goals, you're working collectively to get those, to work towards that same purpose in life. So, research shows that stress on relationships, ebbs and flows. There are more stressful times than less stressful times, but over time, if that repair hasn't happened, things continue to build and grow. So how they cope during stressful times is really predictive of the success of that relationship. So let's talk about positive coping skills, right? What we want to see in relationships is positive didactic coping. So each partner offers and brings to that relationship practical help and advice when it's requested. You don't want to just offer advice if your spouse is not looking for feedback at that moment. Sometimes just listening is enough of a stress reliever. But really, that couple that can offer practical help and advice to each other is a great way to cope in stressful situations. Empathetic understanding. So while we may not agree with what our partner believes or how they've acted in a situation, it's really about creating a level of empathetic understanding so that while we don't agree with it, we can at least understand where they're coming from and hear them out and be able to gain a level of understanding rather than judgment. Affection. In stressful times, it's important to have a partner that reaches out with affection rather than distance. But that is one of the predictors in helping positively coping with stressful situations. Of course, encouragement. And then supporting the individual well-being as well as the relationship well-being. It's important to remember, as we talked about Bowen's family systems theory a few weeks back, and talking about that differentiation piece, it's important that these two individuals in this spousal relationship maintain a level of differentiation. So supporting that individual well-being is important, but just as important is to look at that relationship as its own being and making sure that there's support for those that common goal within that relationship as well. Negative coping is really destructive forms of advice giving or creating distance. That flight mode, if you will, Mocking, sarcasm, criticism, all of those things definitely do not lead to healthy, positive coping during stressful times in that relationship. Helping teach couples, individuals, and then couples together how to cope during stressful times is a critical piece in couples therapy. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, you will never meet a couple that hasn't had to or won't in the future have to deal with stressful situations. Even if it's not a fight within the relationship, that stress, those stressors from the outside world can come into play. So helping couples find that positive didactic coping is a critical piece to couples therapy. So what do? Couple comes into our office and we need to first hear them out, listen to both sides of the story, figure out where they're coming from. But a great piece to start as you're looking to assess couples is the genogram. I know we've talked about these before in class, but this is a great way to really dig into where each individual is coming from. So you want to go multi-generational. You want to look back to each individual's upbringing and what the communication patterns were in their original family of origin. And this provides a good roadmap of how each individual, where they're coming from, how they started, where they're at now, and then it helps explain how their communication patterns have gotten to be where they are now, which has led the couple into therapy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to do a genogram. Talked about that. I know you guys have been there, done that. But this is a great tool to use because it shows the strength of relationships and communication patterns over the different generations. That really gives you a solid tool to start out with. But there are other things that you can and should do beyond the genogram. First is just the interview, an assessment interview. This can be done and probably should be done both as a couple and then individually. But really maintaining confidentiality is a big piece. So when you're working with the couple together, of course, the confidentiality is already discussed, that, everything within the therapeutic relationship stays there. But when you pull them apart and you're interviewing individually, it's important that each spouse knows that what's happening is not going to be shared with the other spouse. Now, part of the therapeutic process may be where you help coach one spouse to share some of the information with the other spouse, but that you are not going to do that for them. It's important that they feel confident that you're not taking sides. So even as you hear both sides, it's not about picking a winner, that there's no collusion from a therapist and one spouse against the other. And building rapport is really important. Couples therapy is a sensitive thing because the couple is coming to you and sharing intimate, personal histories and details into their private lives. And so, and oftentimes one of the spouses is less comfortable with the therapeutic process. So it's important to ease those anxieties and fears and build up that rapport in the therapeutic relationship. You also, during your interviews and assessments with them, it's important to discuss whatever presenting problems have brought them to you. What's happening currently that brought them to the office. Asking and screening for special problems. Anything sort of outside the ordinary, that communication struggles that couples have, illness in the family, financial struggles, things like that. Getting a social history, again, this can be done with your genogram, but really looking at health, history of communication patterns, family upbringing, relationships, systemic relationships outside of the marriage that they're coming in to try to work through. Physical health. Don't be hesitant to ask sensitive questions, particularly as it's related to intimate sexual relationship between the couple. That is a large piece to a happy, healthy marriage. And so it's important to have a sense of ease in those conversations with the individuals that are in your office. Of course, we're not in class, so we can't have a discussion about this, but I do want you to think about, and I'm going to post some questions in the discussion board on Canvas afterwards, but think about, are there times when couples therapy is not appropriate, and when is that? What would be the presenting issues that they would come to you that you would then say, I don't think this is the right place for this relationship, or you would refer them to different services, whatever that may look like. Much like assessment with individuals, during the interview, it's important that not only are you listening to the verbal responses to your questions, but also paying very close attention to nonverbal cues that you see the interactional patterns. You're paying attention to each individual's affect, their form of communication. Are they interrupting each other? What is one individual doing while the other person is sharing their side? You're looking for signs of closeness or intimacy, mutuality. Do they seem to share a common goal with them? And again, another great assessment tool is really decision making and problem solving. Having them complete a task together and then observing their interactions as they do so. So let's move into some theoretical approaches to couples therapy. First, we're looking at behavioral approaches. So these are the actions that each partner takes within the relationship. Cognitive behavioral. So again, the thought process and how the internal thoughts are related to the actions and the behaviors of each individual. And then thirdly, I'm going to bring in emotion focused. So this is where we're talking a little bit less about those actions, but we continue to talk about the actions, but we're talking about them more so based on the emotional level rather than the cognitive level. So the first approach I want to talk about is behavioral cognitive therapy for couples, or traditional behavioral couple therapy. The basis of this framework is to look at the cost versus rewards, and these are based in actions and behaviors. So we're talking consequences, reinforcement, punishment, exchange theory. So really looking at changing out certain behaviors. Our goals include increasing the number of positive exchanges, increasing our conflict resolution skills, increasing positive behaviors, and increasing problem solving skills. So what we're looking to do as a TBCT therapist is identify those positive behaviors that exist, even in the most challenging, most difficult scenarios, relationships. You can always pick out some positive behaviors using strengths-based, right? That's what we want to do. So we want to identify those positive behaviors and then figure out a way to build up those positive behaviors. And then in addition to that, we find new positive behaviors that we can exchange for those negative exchanges that are currently happening. So we're going to find those positive ones and build on them, and then we're going to use new positive behaviors to replace old negative behaviors. One technique that is used is something called caring days, meaning that we designate times, days, things like that to show appreciation, to show positivity, to show caring, and then build that up with positive reinforcement. And so again, as I mentioned before, having some questions built into the discussion, which I will do after completing the presentation. Question 2 is looking at, I want you guys to create a list of behaviors that someone can do that show they care. Little things, big things, anything like that. In TBCT, we're really looking at increasing those positive exchanges, right? It does tie into the Gottman research, where we're looking at 5 positives for every negative. So we're tying that piece in there as well. As I mentioned on the previous slide, TBCT, a big part of that is working on communication and that conflict resolution. So we're working with our couples to increase their empathetic responding. So again, we're looking to increase those positive interactions. Empathetic responding is like active listening, reflective listening, but we're building in that empathy piece. So we want partners to listen, hear, and then respond with an empathetic response to their partner. These techniques in TBCT are role modeled by the therapist and practiced, role played in the session, in the therapy session. And then the couple is expected to go home and practice and when situations arise, but then also they're supposed to practice even before a situation arises. But in the therapy session, what you do is you have 5 minutes to share feelings from one partner, and then the other partner listens and then responds with an empathetic statement. Therapist gives feedback so that the couple knows how they're doing. As I mentioned, all TBCT, similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, is practiced at home and then documented. So each partner will be responsible to take notes and document how things are progressing so that in the next session, the therapist can talk to both partners about how they felt that it went. Integrative behavioral couples therapy is based in part on the IBCT that I was just talking about, but it expands on the idea of a couple's distress and then the intervention that follows on that. So within integrative behavioral couple therapy, the idea is that couples often struggle with one or two broader themes within the context of their relationship. For example, they may struggle on the independence or interdependence of the partners within the relationship. And again, this integrative behavioral couples therapy is really based on the idea that there's one or two sort of common themes that create distress within the relationship. So they conceptualize these ideas with an acronym, DEEP. The D refers to differences between partners' personalities. The first E refers to emotional sensitivities or vulnerabilities that each partner brings to the relationship. The second E refers to external circumstances, so particularly stressful life events that happen outside of the specific couple. And then the P refers to a pattern of interaction. So when we break all of those things down, we're looking basically at the fact that these two individuals come to us with different sets of beliefs and personalities, right? And then they each have their own set of emotional sensitivities or vulnerabilities. The external circumstances, the external stressors play an impact as well, and then the pattern of interactions. So when we break these down, they talk a lot about decreasing those destructive responses or the differences and disagreements. One concept that they bring in is mutual coercion. So this is where one partner or both partners try to coerce or change the other partner. This can happen through criticizing, fault finding, demanding. It can also happen from moving away from or withdrawing from the partner, or perhaps hovering and invading the privacy of the other partner. Moving against the partner with the help of others, meaning finding allies to prove that the partner, to prove to the partner. The second concept is vilification. This is where one partner sees the other one as the villain or vilified. They feel justified in their efforts to change the other person because the other person is the problem. Not looking at the couple as a whole. And then polarization is when partners take sides, become distant or polarized, and these polarizations become larger and create a large drift between the two couples. So those are the three destructive patterns that we focus on in integrative behavioral couple therapy. And these responses, these patterns of behavior reinforce the couple's splitting, if you will. So in working with these couples under integrative behavioral couples therapy, the primary goal is facilitating the acceptance of those differences by integrating strategies for change with strategies for acceptance. So what we're really looking at doing is integrating the idea that they both have their own set of values, their own set of vulnerabilities, sensitivities, and they may be different, but we integrate them into that couple's existence. So we look more at the couple as a unit itself and building on, informing and reinforcing those differences and accepting those differences so that the couple can move forward more as a couple unit. So techniques in how we do this with IBCT. Number one, creating mutual empathy around a problem. So again, building in this concept of acceptance. We may not see eye to eye on what caused this problem or what the stress is or how the other person is reacting to it, but we're building up an empathetic response to whatever the disagreement or the problem is. Unified detachment from the problem. So again, we're really trying to work with the couple to see that, again, while they may have complete different ideas of what the problem is, where it came from, what the solution is, we want them to recognize as a couple, as a unified unit, that there's a problem ahead of them, and detach from that those emotional sensitivities, and therefore be able to look at that problem as a unit, to be able to come up with those with a common solution. And tolerance building. It's really working with couples to, again, build up that empathetic response and accepting the differences, how they view the world, how they view the problem, how they view the relationship, but really accepting those differences and being able to tolerate the fact that they both come with a different set of values and a different set of responses. And really building up that tolerance for those differences within the other person. Another subset of this approach to cognitive or to couples therapy is cognitive behavioral couple therapy. Here we focus on cognitive distortions, and we bring in the concepts that we talked about with integrative couples behavioral therapy. So again, back to the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, where our thoughts play a role on our actions and our behaviors, and vice versa. So our actions or the actions of someone else play a role in our thoughts, and sometimes that thought process is distorted, and that leads to further problems within the communication patterns of that couple. So interpretation and perception of a partner's actions. This is where it's really about how we interpret what our partner does may be completely different than the intention of when our partner does whatever the behavior is. And misinterpretation leads to continued dysfunction. Again, we need to increase that empathetic responding and that empathetic reasoning and listening and responses, so that we can clear up any misinterpretation that's happening here. Within this, our interpersonal belief systems are often what fuel misinterpretations here, right? We have our own set of beliefs and how our partner should be, how they should act, what they should do, and or about ourselves. We have our own internal personal belief systems on the type of person that we are, how we look, how we act, how we take care of, all of those sorts of things. And all of those interpersonal belief systems play a role in us interpreting and misinterpreting the actions that we do and the actions of our partner. So oftentimes what we see is the things that we originally loved about our partner start to turn into negative thoughts or negative beliefs about our partner. So the concept of how you want your partner to be versus how they actually are. And again, the belief system here is that our own personal personalities and interpretations of things, how it started in our relationship and how it's going now. All these different things are shifted and changed by our own upbringing and our own core belief systems. So with cognitive behavioral couples therapy, what our techniques are, what we're trying to do is identify those cognitive distortions that are there on both sides, and then try to come to reasonable and balanced perspective on both sides, right? So we want to make sure, try to help those couples figure out where those distortions lie or those misinterpretations lie, and then come to common ground on what the reality is between the two partners. Some principles of motivational interviewing can be used in these therapy sessions. Socratic questioning, focusing on questions that focus on evidence and logic rather than emotion or reaction. That can help to identify where those distortions lie. And then also should be used with caution, because if this isn't done in a careful manner, it can often lead to defensiveness from one or both partners, and then attacking. So when we use our questions to focus on that evidence and logic, we want to be careful with the wording that we choose and the sensitive nature of how we start those discussions. Another technique is through guided discovery. So this is where we support different perspectives and viewpoints, trying to help each partner see things from the other's perspective. Try to identify the black and white thinking that happens in couples, and exploring feelings to elicit those empathetic responses. And again, the idea is that our behaviors are tied to our thought processes. So if we can take some of the thought process and the emotion out of it and really focus on that black and white thinking, then it's easier for the other person to see my perspective. And then therefore that will elicit more of that empathetic response. The next one I want to talk about is emotionally focused couples therapy. This is one of the more popular couples therapy approaches currently, and it is rooted in attachment theory. So if you remember, if you go back to learning about attachment theory, you've got your insecure versus your secure attachment. You're looking to build and make sure there's a secure base, so a sense of feeling safe within the relationship. It's way less focused on the cognitive aspect or the thought process, and way more focused on the heart and the emotions that are wrapped up and tied into the interactions and into the bottom line of each individual within the couple. We are looking to, as an emotionally focused couples therapist, we're looking to identify where the attachment crises are in each individual. What is their individual attachment style, and how does that mesh with and interact with the other partner? So we're looking to repair that in relationships by focusing on the emotions, not the thought process, but the emotions. We also focus on awareness of our automatic responses and changing those automatic responses. Again, but this is coming from the emotional side of it rather than the cognitive side of it. So a big difference between that cognitive behavioral therapy and emotionally focused couples therapy. Our major tasks are to create safe and collaborative alliance with each individual member of the couple and then the couple as a whole. Assess and expand the emotional responses that guide their interactions, right? So we all get into our own patterns of reaction and responding to our partner. So what we want to do is expand on those to help improve the couple's interactions. We want to restructure the interactions so that they are more accessible and more responsive, based on the individual emotions that are wrapped up in those interactions and in that couple's relationship. The stages of EFT, emotionally focused therapy. Number one, cycle de-escalation. So the first thing we need to do is become aware of and help our couples become aware of the cycle of interactions and the cycle of communication that they're currently in. And then we break apart that cycle. We de-escalate that negative interaction pattern. Then we change those interactional patterns. So we bring in more positive ways of communicating and responding to each other. And we consolidate and integrate. So this is where our couples take what they've learned in our therapy sessions and integrate that into their day-to-day lives and practice. And then they come back and report to us how things are going. All behaviors are reframed in the term of safety needs, emotional safety, that is. So again, remember with EFT, we're taking the cognitive piece out of it and really building in that emotional piece. So all behaviors are discussed from that concept of emotional safety. We're bringing in and building up our empathetic responses to each other, really spending time on being able to understand the partner's perspective on things. It's a big part of this work. So an empathetic response to those emotions and reactions to the interactional pattern that's happening. And then, of course, bringing in just typical problem-solving skills can be incorporated here. So again, we're trying to take some of those actions and reactions out of it from that cognitive standpoint and focusing more on the emotions behind that and bringing in very typical positive problem-solving skills here. Emotionally focused therapy, there's so much more to it, and in a couple weeks we're going to be breaking that down and talking more specifically about it. We're going to talk about, we're going to spend quite a bit more time talking specifically about emotionally focused therapy. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Some general tips in couples therapy. Number one, most therapies are integrative of different types of techniques. So while I've broken down a few of them for you here, oftentimes in couples therapy, you'll find bits and pieces of all of those different techniques. Couples therapy is still grounded in theory and perspective, but the therapist must be acutely aware of countertransference, especially regarding gender bias when that is present. And that's nothing shockingly new for couples therapy, right? This is something we need to be cognizant of in individual therapy, group therapy, things like that. Cultural sensitivity is extremely important in all subsects of therapy, but in relationship to couples therapy, because there can be some cultural norms and interactional patterns of spousal relationships. So it's very important that if you have clients come to you from a culture that you're not familiar with, that you familiarize yourself with cultural norms within their background, so that you can make sure to incorporate those aspects into your work with the couple. It's also important to note that the majority of research on couples therapy has been done on heterosexual white couples, right? That's just the nature of the beast at the moment. So if you're looking for if you're working with non-normative couples, it's important to do outside research. Look for newer studies, newer theories and therapy styles based on working with those non-normative couples, or familiarize yourself with different struggles that happen. Again, it's part of being culturally sensitive and culturally competent within your work. At the bottom of your screen here, you'll see a link to a case study. This will also be integrated into the discussion questions posted on Canvas. It's important to note that even after working through couples therapy, some couples will not survive. The marriage will not survive. So as a couples therapist, it's important to figure out what the next steps might be. So how do we then work with our clients through the process of divorce? One of the ways to do that is through psychoeducational type work, where we're helping them understand the process of dividing assets and how do you have this new existence without your marriage anymore. There's mediation and divorce counseling, or divorce coaching, I apologize. Divorce therapy is, again, trying to help these individuals work through what their relationship is like moving forward, even if they're not married anymore, but perhaps there's children involved. They'll still have to maintain contact in some ways. So helping those individuals map out what those interactions look like moving forward. Focusing on the well-being of the children that are involved. How can you co-parent without being married and without being in the same household? All of those sorts of things. And if it reaches this stage, you want to be very careful if you're meeting with them as individuals rather than meeting with them as a couple, because it can really alienate one partner from the other. The concerns of collusion, transference, all of those things really come into play if you start working with them individually. And, there's a question as to whether or not, if you see them as a couple and then they split up, should you maintain contact with one or both of them to continue in therapy? And there's two sides to this, and I think you have to figure out what would be right for you and what feels right for you as to whether or not those individuals should then be referred on to other therapists rather than continuing their work with you. So now I want to wrap up. Talked about a lot of different stuff, and while this is not the ideal platform to do it with a recorded lecture, because we miss out on discussion and questions and having everybody be a part of that and add in their questions and thoughts. So please take some time to, if you have any specific questions about today's presentation, please post them in the discussion board so that your classmates can see your questions, and then also responses from that. That's unfortunately, like I said, doing a recorded lecture really takes away from that discussion piece, which can be so helpful when we're talking about different therapies. So please take a moment to do that, in addition to responding to the discussion questions that I will post. And then a reminder that your Community of Inquiry assignment is due on March 21st. Remember, March 21st is the day that we'll be having the teaching demonstrations from our two possible candidates coming in applying for the assistant professor position. So rather than printing them and putting them on paper, I'm going to ask that you upload those community of inquiry assignments into SpeedGrader. So remember, March 21st will be via Zoom. And I know there were some concerns in class about coming to the classroom to Zoom so that you wouldn't have to deal with travel time getting there for your next class. I know from talking to Dr. Kennedy that on March 21st, she was also going to have her class be via Zoom. So those first two classes of the day on March 21st will be via Zoom. Be looking for the Zoom link that I will send out for class on March 21st. So then for the following week, the next time I will see you in person in the classroom, March 28th, your reading assignments include the Bolton text, chapter 13, and then I have a link in here for the Emotionally Focused Casebook, chapter 1. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be diving in deeper into that emotionally focused therapy. So I read those two chapters before, and that's the next time I will see you in person, physically in the classroom, is March 28th. Just a reminder, don't forget to keep working on your teletherapy assignments with your partner, and then logging your self-care for your self-care assignment as well. To fully wrap up, I want to thank you all for your flexibility and putting up with listening to me on this recorded lecture. Again, not my favorite and not my ideal, but wanted to make sure that the information got to you. So I hope you all enjoyed your spring break, and again, don't hesitate to reach out with questions, either preferably on the discussion board so that your classmates can see them as well. Thank you.